Hi, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Nowell, the president of Nielsen Book. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Jonathan, perhaps you could briefly summarize what Nielsen Book Scan does.
Well, the business is Nielsen Book, and we have, I guess, 4 product groups. We are very proactive in identifiers. So the ISBN, we originally wrote the rules for the ISBN many years ago. We facilitate the development of the ISTC, so that's the identifiers part of the business. And then 3 broad product groups: book data, which is metadata, resource discovery globally. We have BookNet, which is a transaction-based service out of the UK in particular, and then Book Scan, which you referred to just now, which is our sort of our fastest growing POS sales data tracking and measurement services.
That would be great. I was fortunate enough to attend your presentation at the supply chain meeting, and you gave a fascinating presentation on consumer buying habits of ebooks and other kinds of books. And I was hoping that you could kind of take the time and summarize what you remember of what you found in terms of the consumer buying habits.
Well, I think firstly, if you look at the macro consumer position as at October 2009, I think as we come out of recession, the sort of great hopes of going into a new period of consumer spending growth, I think that's unlikely, I have to say. So
it's a lie.
It's unlikely.
Unlikely, okay.
I think the consumer's behaviour will be characterised by restraint. I think the consumer's behaviour will be characterised by saving. I think that doesn't necessarily augur badly for books or for ebooks. I think generally we shouldn't expect the consumer to come back and start buying in vast quantities and spending money. So I think from a macro perspective, I think that's the case. I think from a micro perspective, looking at the book industry, I think we are increasingly going to be challenged over cannibalisation of our traditional supply chain, our traditional supply and pricing of books by ebooks. Publishers and retailers have to get pricing right. The consumer will not see ebooks as being worth to them the same as a hardback. So there's clearly going to be some disparity between consumer perception, as I understand it today, and what the publishers are hoping the consumer's going to pay for it.
Have you gotten specific information as to what kind of price consumers are looking for?
Well, ultimately, consumers are looking for free.
Fair enough.
Needless to say, I think consumers are used to being able to look at information, download information for free via online sources. So I think that's going to be a big hurdle to get over. And I think publishers have to face up with that and deal with it, and retailers have to deal with it. They can't ignore it; it's not going to go away.
And what have you found about the demographics of the consumers?
Well, the biggest single demographic issue for anybody who's interfacing, dealing with, and selling to the consumer is going to be the ageing population. So if you look now at my view, certainly, and the view of the Nielsen folks, is that not only are we having an aging population, we're having an aging population where the young generation, our children, will not be as wealthy as we are. And this, I think, throws up an awful number of challenges to all sorts of marketeers in all product groups, particularly those dealing with the consumer.
Interesting. I seem to remember from your talk that the percentage of free time devoted to books you found has declined greatly.
There's increasing competition on time. I mean, if you look at the key currencies that the consumer deals with all the time, is dealing with time, money, space. On the time currency, well, I'm afraid there's less time to spend on pretty much everything. I think and online and people's behaviour online has taken a lot of time away from what we would call traditional, self-time of sitting down and reading books.
And what did you mean by space?
Well, it's a space in which we live. I mean, it's very interesting that I live in a nice house, and I wallpaper my shelves with, I wallpaper my house with books.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I'm not sure that space is the same availability now.
Right. Do you plan to include ebook numbers in your total book sales data?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're working now, we're successfully building a panel, and when we're ready to launch that panel, we will be certainly making a lot of noise about it.
Is there a challenge with building a panel when there are only 3 to 4 big players?
Yes, but I think we are pretty good at building panels where there's a relatively low number of major players. So I don't think that's an issue. Critically, for all research companies and POS data aggregators like ourselves, it is critical that we do everything we possibly can to ensure that we don't reveal individual retailers' numbers unless they want them to be revealed.
Sure. I can imagine if there are only 3 to 4 players that there might be a risk to them if they expose their numbers, or at least as part of data, that's given the few number of players.
Well, let me give you an example perhaps of Canada. We don't provide a book scan service in Canada, but there is a service provider in Canada called Canada BookNet, and Canada BookNet have the biggest single chain in Canada is Indigo, and Indigo have north of 50% market share. So,
I see.
And it's still a very successful panel, hugely helpful in managing supply chain issues.
Right, that makes sense. I've heard a lot recently about metadata. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about why metadata is important.
Well, metadata is absolutely critical, even in the sort of days of wonderful search engines for the consumer. And why is metadata so important? It provides the means to which the consumer, the retailer, the library is able to make sure they have the right edition, the right copy of the book in terms of their search. And there's so many more ways in which we're able to search data now in a structured way. And the richer the metadata, and it's proven that the richer the metadata, the more books you're going to sell. It's simple as that.
And I've also heard about challenges to getting metadata right, and I hope. Can you explain what?
You'll never get metadata absolutely right. If you think about our own database in the UK, we push through about 40 to 50 million changes to our UK file of data every single year.
Amazing.
We're dealing with 140,000 new books every year. Okay, we're dealing with changes in price, changes in availability. So it's a phenomenally difficult process, and as there are more and more products that we're having to provide resource discovery for, it becomes even tougher. And we are constantly refining, redesigning, developing our systems in order to take more metadata coming through and to push it through to our products more quickly.
And I guess final question, from your vantage point as president of Nielsen Book, I'm interested in finding out your perspective on the future of book publishing, particularly in the horizon of the next 12 months. Where do you see it going?
Well, where I see it going is not necessarily a horizon in the next 12 months. I can give you I could try to give you a staged process, but I think that let me summarise it by saying that I don't think the value chain that we see today in publishing is the value chain we're going to see in 5 years.
How's
And
that?
I think because what we will see is we'll see, I'm sure, some big names authors who are spanning the value chain from the creation through to the dissemination, disintermediating both publisher and retailer, agents disintermediating both publishers and retailers. Certainly where you've got a brand that has high levels of consumer recognition, I think that's going to be true. I think in the broad scheme of things, I think the supply chain that we have today is not going to fundamentally change, or the value chain we have today is not going to fundamentally change in necessarily a 5-year time span, but as and if ebooks start to, ebooks and digital resources take a greater share of consumer spend, then we will see disintermediation taking place of the traditional players. I'm afraid that's inevitable.
Well, this is great. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, sir.